Hi, I'm Nora Young. I'm the host of Spark. Thank you so much for joining us. And today I have Andrew Hilts. Andrew is a research fellow at the Citizen Lab. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, nice to be here.
Glad to have you here. So today we're going to take your questions about requesting your data. So just before we get into your questions, I want to ask you, PIPEDA is the law that kind of underlies some of this stuff. Can you tell me just briefly what PIPEDA is?
Sure. So Canada has two primary federal privacy laws, the Privacy Act and PIPEDA. The Privacy Act governs the government's use of your personal data, whereas PIPEDA is geared towards companies and businesses using, collecting, disclosing, and holding on to your personal data. And one part of PIPEDA includes the provision of access and correction, which gives Canadians the legal right to submit requests for access to their personal data, and companies are obligated to respond within 30 days.
And are we, as Canadian citizens, are we able to request that data from only Canadian companies or from other companies as well?
Any company that does that has a real and substantial connection to Canada, so that does some sort of business in Canada, whether that's an internet company or otherwise, as long as they have a presence in Canada, they're obligated to respond.
Okay, so you folks at the Citizen Lab built this Access My Info tool, which is an online tool to help people do this. So can you walk us through it a little bit? And it's going to take over the screen and just talk us through how you use it.
Sure. So I'll pull up the site here. And so basically it's quite simple. You have a list of types of companies you can request your data from. So I'm just going to choose telecommunications, which is one we're all familiar with. And I'll just choose Bell. It's the first one. And so basically what you do, once you've chosen your company, there's a list of preset questions that you can ask, basically questions about how your data is used and what is done with your data. You can ask some custom questions if you like, but we've provided these by default. And then you enter some basic information to let the company know who you are and how they can find your records. Access My Info doesn't collect any of that personal information you submit. It's just used to create this letter. So we've written this template that cites PIPEDA and reminds companies of their obligation to comply with these requests. And then you can either open up your email, and we have the pre-written letter right there, or you can create a PDF to download and print off and send in the mail. So that's it in a nutshell.
Right, fantastic. And it's available in English and French, right?
That's correct.
Okay, and as we said before, this doesn't just apply to Canadian companies. You can request American companies, Silicon Valley companies to get your data. Is that right?
That's right. There may be some instances, especially with like smaller startup companies, they may not be, if they're like international companies, they may not be I guess they might not be aware of their legal obligations to comply with Canadian law. They might be thinking, oh, I'm an American company, what does this law have to do with me? But we've seen through our research that larger companies, more mature businesses operating outside of Canada do tend to respond to these requests.
Right. So we're just waiting for some questions to come in. Please feel free to type your questions in the comments below, and Andrew will be happy to answer them, walk you through any more of the details about how to use this Access My Info tool. So just very broadly, what have been kind of the results of the people using the tool so far?
So we've just released a research report about that topic called Approaching Access, and we look at how companies in 3 different industries respond to these requests. So you have your telcos, online dating companies, and fitness trackers, and what we found generally is that responses vary quite a bit depending on industries and even depending on different companies. But in general, what you can get back if companies respond, and most of them do, are most of the records that they have about you. So as an example, from your telecommunications provider, you could get back basically screenshots of their customer service logs. So anytime you've called your company to, ask about how much you're paying per month, ask about like overage charges, or a big one might be if you were traveling, for some fun in the sun, and you accidentally turned your phone on and got a bunch of text messages, and then you discover you're hit with like a $100 fee, and then you call your company. All that's recorded by the company whenever you complain, and you definitely can get access to those records across most telcos, and that's provided for free. For other types of companies, for fitness tracking companies, you can get access, as you might expect, to like your health information that you've recorded in the app. You generally can't get access to other information that the app is collecting from you that you're not really consciously submitting, like your runs or your heart rates, but like how they're tracking you while you use the app. In some cases, fitness trackers use like analytics libraries so they can analyze the performance of the apps and see what buttons people are clicking on. But what we found in prior research is these libraries oftentimes collect huge reams of data, like your precise location down to a millimeter and stuff like that. Wow. And that's all sent as you use the app. So that kind of stuff you don't get access to with fitness trackers, but you definitely can get your health information.
Okay. So Scott Mellon had asked, do companies respond to these requests? And I guess the answer is yes, in the overwhelming number of cases. We have a question here from Kevin Chapman who says, are there any obligations under PIPEDA to de-identify personal information before it's shared to a third party?
I think yes, if you haven't given prior consent for that data to be shared with a third party. And generally, when you sign up for services, you have to agree to their terms and conditions and privacy policies. And typically, the privacy policies are worded quite generally, such that there's words like, we may disclose your data to companies that include these, that perform services such as so it's very broad and all-encompassing. So by agreeing to use the service, oftentimes you're agreeing to companies to share your data. But typically, when companies are sharing their data, sharing your data with third parties for the purposes of providing you a service, usually the best practice would be the company has some sort of confidentiality agreement with the third parties so that they are bound to protect the confidentiality of that data. But if the data has been de-identified, the company could argue that it's not really personal data anymore. Therefore, they could share it more broadly.
Interesting. Darren Gregory has a question here. He says, I'm curious to understand if under current Canadian law, telecoms are being used by security agencies in ways we might not be fully enough informed is happening.
Under existing laws, so I'm not an expert on national security matters, but I do know that there are some sort of regulations in place that govern how intelligence agencies can use Canadians' telecommunications. I think, I can't speak for specifics, unfortunately, but I know like generally metadata is being collected by intelligence agencies. And I think oftentimes they have internal procedures to like try to identify what data applies to Canadians and what's about non-Canadians, and they'll try to filter things out. But obviously it's not perfect. But unfortunately I can't give you like a really solid answer on that because and again, there's not a lot of transparency and accountability with regard to our intelligence agencies as well.
Yeah, metadata being things like essentially the data about the data as opposed to the content of your text message, the date that it was sent and the location it was sent and that type of thing.
That's right. And with our research, at least we were able to determine that your telecommunications provider doesn't actually hold on to the contents of your phone calls or the contents of your text message. That stuff is not retained for most people. What you do get back is, what you can get back anyways, usually if you pay a fee, which you can maybe talk about later, but is the metadata. So when you made a call, what cell tower you're connected to when you made that call, how long the call was, who you were calling, and the same sort of data about your text messages. And that sort of information, one by one isn't very interesting, but if you were to analyze everyone's metadata, you could identify all sorts of patterns about when people are calling, where they are when they're calling, all sorts of intelligence about how we use communications in our daily life.
Do you have a sense just generally how Canada stacks up internationally in terms of the level of citizens' privacy? Are we doing a good job? Are we leaders? Are we lagging behind?
I would say generally the EU is regarded as pushing the bar forward on data protection as it's more commonly known in a regulatory sense there. So in Europe, they have this general data protection regulation that's coming into effect in a few months, and that's got, I would liken it to the access provision we have in Canada, but on steroids, because companies not only have to respond to access requests, they also have to provide that data in a usable format so that you could essentially, I think the idea is you could take that data from one company, take your data to another company and sort of have some kind of service continuity. At least that's the theory. It remains to be seen how effective that would be in practice. But I think that is a useful provision, because what we found for some of the requests people have made in Canada, particular to like telcos, is you get data back in like PDFs with screenshots and stuff like that. And if you ever try to like analyze a spreadsheet that's on a PDF across like 100 pages, it's not as easy as it would be if you got an Excel file. So that sort of thing is what the EU regulation is trying to address, where you can actually get data in a more usable format so people can actually make use of what they're getting back more easily.
For sure. I guess we'll have to see what, I think it's coming into effect in May, the EU
Yeah,
provision, so we'll see what comes with that. We have a question here from Ed. Ed says, can you please comment on the current state of privacy protection for children? My children need to use Google products at school. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Google is definitely bound by U.S. privacy legislation. The acronym is COPPA, which is Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or something like that. And a lot of times with U.S. companies, you'll see in their terms of service that it says no one under the age of 13 should be using this, and that's because of COPPA's regulations. So companies are obligated under this law to obtain parental consent if a minor is, or someone under 13 is, to use the product. But that parental consent is, I believe, quite heavy-handed in that you have to go through quite a few steps to actually consent in that way. So there are protections in place, but a lot of times, you know, children are smart. They can use apps without parents knowing about them. They can sign up for things, and there's not really strong ways to stop children from using apps, but that might not have been the question. Using Google products at school, that raises all sorts of interesting questions about how Google is using the data it's collecting about children, what sort of analysis is doing on those things, and also just like the influence this giant corporation has over, you know, children's young minds in education. I can't speak exactly about what Google's doing, but I think, you know, it requires some criticism.
So far, have there been things that really surprised you in the information that you've gathered for the report?
One of the most surprising things that comes to mind is a finding from our analysis of online dating websites, what you can get back there. So online dating websites, it was usually quite difficult to get detailed data. Usually companies would respond to questions we had, but at least the companies that are owned by Match.com, which is pretty much the biggest online dating company because they own dozens of online dating sites, including like OkCupid, Tinder, Plenty of Fish, many others. They responded similarly in that initially what our participants got back when they made their requests was that the company is willing to give you your data, or at least, sorry, it said it was willing to give you data that wasn't visible already in the user interface, which I found to be a little troubling because it's hard to know exactly what's there. There's so many things you've done throughout the course of the app. How do you keep track of it all? So we were able to push back and say, okay, we want access to all the data. Actually, one of our participants didn't have an account anymore. They had deactivated it. So they were able to say, well, I don't have an account anymore, but I still want access to this data. So OkCupid did provide a full sort of data disclosure to them after they verified their identity with the company. And one of the surprising things there was The company provided, first of all, it seems to retain your precise location for every time you've opened up the app on your phone since you basically installed the app. So it doesn't sort of delete your location when you're done using the app at a given time, which, you know, from a privacy standpoint, that's not ideal because the primary purpose, as far as I'm concerned, with collecting your data, or sorry, collecting your location when you're using a dating app is so you can see people near you. But why does it matter where you were a year ago to the company? The other surprising thing was similarly in the line of data being held on to longer than you might expect, the participant got back photos that they thought they had deleted a year prior. So that was very surprising that the person had deleted the photos, you know, using the user interface. It said it was removed from the profile. There was no way to view it in a trash or anything like that. But in the data they got back, all those photos, lo and behold, were suddenly, you know, back from the dead. So it gave us sort of a pause and just, I guess the old adage, like once you put something out on the internet, you never know, you can't really take it back. I think that sort of proved to be the case here.
And also against what you would assume as a user, right? You assume when you delete something that it's deleted. Kevin Chapman has a question for you, Andrew. He says, are there geographic requirements around the location of third-party data centers that PIPEDA can personal info potentially go anywhere in the world? So are there any...
That's a good question. I'm not like a legal scholar, so I can't give you a definitive answer. I know generally if you agree to a privacy policy that gives companies wide, I guess, permission to collect your data. I think it's important to note that privacy policies in general are in place to give companies permission to do things with your data rather than in place to protect your privacy. So the name privacy policy is kind of a misnomer. But I think there are sort of agreements between economies, like the US and the EU have this safe harbor agreement, or they used to. Now they've replaced it with something else. But it's basically like an agreement to say our privacy regulatory regimes are comparable enough that we can rest assured that if your data is over in this jurisdiction, that it will receive adequate privacy protection. So there are these kind of agreements in place between countries, but they're certainly not complete, and there's nothing stopping a company based who knows where from collecting your data if you provide it to them.
This is a straightforward question. Why should you request your data? Why should you request your data?
Oh, that's a great question. I think there's many reasons. I think the first one is basically when we use online services or our phones, it's sort of just ingrained in our day-to-day behavior. You're just like typing something in, sending it off, swiping on Tinder, tracking your runs. It's all just part of the daily course of events, and you're just sort of creating this big trail of digital exhaust behind you. And I think by requesting your data, you can take a step back and take pause and see from a more like bird's eye view all that's been generated by your activity. And I think that can be quite compelling to see because it is sort of far removed from the day-to-day. And I think the fact that we use these devices and these apps so frequently and is so embedded in everything we do now, we don't really take that step at the time to think, oh, what's happening to this data? Because like you want to just use your app to use the app and do whatever you want to do with it. So I think taking the step, taking some time to go to accessmyinfo.org, requesting your data, and waiting to get a response and seeing like a clearer picture, it can be very illuminating. I think the second reason is more of like a advocacy reason. If you want companies to be more privacy protective, more transparent about what they're doing with your data, requesting your data can send a strong signal to these companies and especially to privacy advocates within the companies too. They can, if they want to have this privacy program in place at their company, but it's hard to convince management to do it, they can point to these requests they're getting, like, look, there's a lot of our customers who care about these issues, and there's a market for this, and that can help companies justify internally that they want to develop more robust privacy protections.
There's a question from Bria who wanted to know what surprising thing you learned about your own data, and also how much it cost you to request your data. Sure.
So in our report, there's a map that I created this map based on my data that I got back from Rogers. So most people that were in our study didn't pay the extra money to get this detailed cell tower information, but I did because work paid for it. So that's another reason why these costs are a barrier, because most people don't want to pay this money to get the detailed data. But anyways, I paid that $200 to get 1 month only, 1 month records from September 2016 of which cell towers I connected to when I was making or receiving calls or sending texts. And what that means is generally where I was when I was making a call or receiving a call, etc. So as I mentioned earlier, what we got back was a PDF of tables upon tables. So basically, I think most people don't have the time to do this or necessarily the expertise, but I created a database from this spreadsheet and then wrote software to divide up the data between business hours and non-business hours, and then plotted them on a map, and then was able to sort of deduce from this heat map that I created, there's one heat map over here and one heat map over here. This was where I worked, this was where I lived. So business hour location, non-business hour location. And that sort of insights can be generated potentially on a massive scale by companies that hold this sort of information. So that was very interesting to see. But it did cost me a lot of money, and it also cost a lot of time to invest in scripting this data to visualize it in a way that's actually meaningful. And I think if companies take more steps to actually give consumers tools to understand the data that they have about them, that would make those insights at least more readily available to a wider population.
Megan Walsh says, do you foresee us getting our privacy back? What do you think?
I think it's a constant negotiation and a constant struggle. I am not a nihilist that thinks there's no privacy anymore. What I do think is privacy requires active assertion of your rights. Like I was saying earlier, if you demonstrate that you care about your privacy to companies, they will take it seriously. We've seen Apple recently has been adopting a more pro-privacy marketing strategy, and also technical features where they're in down their phone a lot more, so that even Apple doesn't have access to your health data or your photos. It's all in theory encrypted against your passcode. So I think asserting this sort of consumer demand for privacy is very important.
So Andrew, what are you planning to do next with your research?
Well, one thing we want to do is expand Access My Info to support new types of industries, sort of more data-intensive industries. I think a lot of people will be interested to know what car-sharing apps or Uber has about them, what Airbnb might have about them, or other hotel-like companies. Banks and financial industries, insurance. These are all companies that have a rich amount of data, and especially for the finance organizations, they use this data to make decisions that can affect your opportunities in life. So I think that would be quite interesting. And of course, we have contact information on Access My Info. So if you have a industry or type of company that you think you'd like to request your data from, please don't hesitate to drop us an email, and I'll definitely look it over and we'll consider it for the next release of the tool.
Well, that sounds like a pretty good note to end things on. Andrew, thank you so very much for joining us.
Oh, awesome.
And thank you to our Facebook audience for taking part. If you want to find out more about Andrew's report, visit cbc.ca/spark or the Citizen Lab site. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.